Diary of a Wimpy Kid. Yes, Greg is back with another feature film, and this time, his wimpiness is gonna be completely animated. I'm gonna start this off by being honest and direct with you all. I'm coming in 100% fresh with no knowledge about this franchise whatsoever. Okay, technically, I did do some research beforehand to know some of the basics of what all this is about. What originally started as a little online book by Jeff Kinney on the website Funbrain in 2004, Greg wouldn't have his first physical diary until 2007, where every year to this day, Kinney writes a new story about the boy's unlucky life and has since become one of the best-selling book series of all time with over 250 million copies of the book sold. But that's not all. With that prestigious title, that also comes with a massive fan base and even not one, not two, but 4 major movies made. But even with that newly acquired knowledge, that still doesn't change that I'm coming into this with no idea of what to expect. I've never read any of the books and I haven't seen any of the movies. In fact, there were times that I even underestimated the sheer size of the fan base. I still remember being overwhelmed and confused a few years ago by how the internet exploded in rage and shouting, "Not my Roderick!" So this is all to say that this review will be from the perspective of a newcomer to the Wimpy Kid franchise, and the 2021 Disney Plus movie will be my first full taste of Greg's wimpy adventures through life. So now that it's time to open this new diary, or journal as Greg prefers, will the franchise get a passing grade in their new animation school? Or is this movie as wimpy as Greg himself? Let's find out. The story. It's funny how some people forget that being a kid can sometimes be tough. This is especially the case when they have to start a new school. The story of Diary of a Wimpy Kid is regarding the socially difficult transition of going into middle school, where the rules of elementary and childlike innocence are now replaced with a more hostile environment where you'll need all the luck you can get to survive if your popularity status isn't high. But especially, this transition is meant to test the friendship of Greg Heffley and Raleigh Jefferson, 2 childhood buddies whose middle school experience come with different results. And just like their outcomes, there are 2 feelings that this movie can deliver. One is a funny situational comedy that plays well with Greg's misfortunes, while the other is a mean-spirited feature that pushes this kid around who isn't exactly a good egg himself. It constantly flip-flops with one tone to the next that ultimately delivers this mixed sense of how it can be. I'll be honest, because of this, I've often debated with myself if I should forgive this picture for some of the more unappealing moments because it balances out with the times that are actually fun and does take advantage of the concepts of this kid with stupidly bad luck. And yet, looking back at the bad moments, when it gets mean-spirited, it can be downright despicable to the point that it gives the idea that maybe Greg is just getting what he deserves for being such a jerk. I'll get more into this later, but most of the unpleasant feelings comes from Greg himself because of how he can be quite selfish, constantly putting himself above everyone else instead of doing the right thing, even when it involves his best friend Raleigh.
I think I hurt my arm.
Yeah, I think I might have pulled something myself. Can you believe that throw, though?
But here's the thing with what I think about the story. Yes, there are times when the mean-spirited tone can spoil the moment, but I will say that I do admire the story structure and its goal. For the most part, this is a series of slice-of-life events of Greg and Raleigh's misadventures, from their first day of middle school, to trick-or-treating in forbidden territories, to having a cast at school, to hanging out with the weird kid. And yet, they all strongly link to tell this one cohesive story about growing up. How that period between being a kid and a teen can be awkward and hard to know what to keep from your childhood and what has to go in order to act more like your appropriate age. It is meant to be relatable for that target audience so that they could connect with those hardships. And even for an adult like me who already went through all that years ago, there are times where I can see myself in Greg and Raleigh's situation.
You know, maybe this isn't such a good idea. Maybe my mom can homeschool me.
Come on, Riley. You can do this.
Granted, this is not the best executed story for the reasons I've already explained. But there is a good story that knows how to play with a simple concept in many ways and keep audiences guessing regarding what will happen next. Maybe some could debate that the foreshadowing is obvious, but the film covers it well with highlighting how will Greg end up falling flat on his face the next time. Yes, the mean-spiritedness can sometimes ruin the experience, but the story knows what it wants to talk about and discusses it well to have people connect with some of the hardships of childhood. The animation. You know what this movie reminds me of? DreamWorks' Captain Underpants. Not only because of how this is a movie mostly set in school based on a popular kids book, but also because of the style of animation that it wants to do. Both properties have a very simple art style in their respective books, almost childlike to help emphasize that the story is from the perspective of a kid. And for their animated adaptations, they took those simple designs from the pages and bring them to life with colorful computer graphics. However, this is where the similarities end because the result for each of them are quite different. In the case of Wimpy Kid, it does look strange, but it is understandable with what it's trying to do. On their own, the character designs can look pretty weird. Some resemble more like puppets, especially when they have a bigger mouth and a bigger nose, and others can almost seem non-human. Maybe this is because I don't know Wimpy Kid all that well, but do they ever explain why the Heffleys adopted a mutated duck? And everyone seems cool with it?
Yeah.
But, then again, this is not really something to criticize heavily because it wants to stay true to the look of the original art of the books, and I get that it's an integral part of the franchise's identity. Again, it can seem weird, but it is for the sake of respecting the source material. However, while I do respect the point of the designs, I will say that its use of CG is not what I find to be the best. You see, the big criticism I have with the adaptation here is what I find to be the problem with some computer animated films with a heavily stylized look. In a way, there are two contrasting styles that are happening that are just not mixing well. You got the very simple designs that are from the books, and another style that wants to be realistic. The kind that is common with CG films that wants to add detail to everything to make the world around the characters look the same as ours, including the brick walls on the school, the texture on the clothes, the gravel on the ground, and yes, even the mold on the cheese.
What are you standing around for? Get the ball!
It's almost like the animation wants to do two completely different things at once, but doesn't realize that it probably could have done better by finding a way to make those two styles work together to create one full cognitive image. I know that there are some movies that have those two styles, and it worked out pretty well for them, like the Peanuts movie, but what makes it feel off here is that the movie acts more like a straightforward computer animated film where everything is commonly 3D. It just so happens to have very simplistic designs, and never once does it take advantage of them. On a side note, there are some cool moments where the movie does become fully 2D and have the look be exactly like how they are in the pages. I'll give it that those scenes are cool and do spice up the visuals, but they are unfortunately pretty rare where they only happen at the beginning, the end, and when Roderick gives advice about middle school.
The only way to get rid of the cheese touch was to give it to someone else.
I know that some may say that I am harsh on the animation, but I just want to clarify that I know that it's not meant to do anything spectacular. Keep in mind that this is a low-budgeted animated film with a running time of just under an hour meant for streaming. It never had the intentions of pushing the medium to the next level or amaze people with what the animators can do. Plus, I will say now that even if the two styles don't mix well, they are good in their own right and still result in a decent looking feature. The point of the animation here is to tell the story, and while it's not the best and the results may seem strange, it at least serves its job. The characters. I could tell as a newcomer that this is not the kind of movie that will introduce the full roster of characters that the fans already know from both the live-action movies and the books. There are a few that do appear that probably have a bigger role in later stories, but in here, it's mostly about the two boys entering middle school. Let me start this off with the wimpy kid himself, Greg Heffley, because I have a lot to say about him. In a way, he is the modern Charlie Brown, the kid whom, no matter what he does, he usually has the worst luck and ends up failing miserably. However, like I said before, unlike Charlie Brown, where he always has the best intentions and is a good kid at heart, Greg can often be a selfish brat to the point where he generally gets what he deserves. Of course, there are ways that you can make a selfish character feel enjoyable and have his bad behavior and his comeuppance be fun and give out a good laugh. There are a few times that those do happen with Greg too, but they are honestly quite rare. For the most part, he's the source of the mean-spirited tone where his bad luck mostly comes from his decisions and selfish intentions. He doesn't do what he does because of comedy or for his friend Rowley, but for his own need to put himself at the top. In fact, the movie starts with him admitting that he's only with Rowley so that he can later be rich and famous.
My best friend, Rowley, is in the same grade as me. I doubt he's ever going to be rich and famous, but it's good to have him around for laughs.
I'll even add that his misfortunes aren't even that rewarding or funny either because they kind of add to the mean-spirited nature. Like, it makes it hard to find anything that is pleasant here, whether it be Greg or what is around him. The one redeeming factor that I can say about him is that it is true that his selfishness can be considered realistic. While many of his choices are obviously wrong, kids do make decisions not necessarily because they're the right thing to do, but rather to go with the outcome where they would least likely face consequences to their actions. Let's be honest, who hasn't been in a situation where they try to hide something so that they don't upset their parents? Heck, who hasn't done so as an adult? With Greg, it puts you in a weird spot where you want to condemn him, but then a memory from your past would pop up in your head that would tell you that you're being a pot calling the kettle black. So I'd say that Greg is kind of a mix. He's a relatable kid, but also a jerk that gets what's coming to him. Then there's his best friend, Rowley, a very naive boy who never grasps the reality that he's getting older and still acts like a little kid. Even if some of his attitude can be perceived as childish, he's a lot more optimistic and innocent than Greg, which is why he can end up with the better outcomes.
Well, at least for Rowley, it wasn't a problem.
Yes, he does face some of the same problems like bullying and getting made fun of, but his obliviousness ends up having some benefits where he goes through life carefree, and because he's a happy kid, he gets a happy life that radiates positive energy. In fact, the only times where things don't go well for him are when he's with Greg, which can be debatably said that maybe Rowley is better off without Greg. As for the rest of the characters, again, their roles are very minimal. From Roderick being the rebellious older brother, to the teenagers that chase them on Halloween night, to Fregley being the weird kid whose awkwardness probably makes him the funniest character of the movie, to Greg's mom Susan, who's the typical tired mom that has to deal with Greg's problems. By the way, speaking of the latter, am I the only one that noticed that her voice changes in quality? I get that you gotta make the most out of working during tough times that keeps us at home, but I can't help but feel like her voice was recorded in two jarringly different places.
Don't let Roderick scare you, Greg. Middle school's gonna be fun. Oh, and please don't mention the cheese thing to Rowley. Fine, 8:30 and not a second later.
Oh, Rowley, you know what? Those glow sticks are a great idea. Let me see if I have any in the pantry.
I'm sure there's a lot more to them than what they show here, but this version of the characters is honestly not the most memorable bunch, especially with a mostly despicable lead. As my first experience with the franchise, I will say that this did not leave me with a great first impression, but I guess I cannot say that I hate it either. The 2021 Disney Plus version of Diary of a Wimpy Kid does have some of the charm of the beloved book series, but like Greg himself, it can end up with some wimpy results. While its protagonist can have as much appeal as the school's infamous cheese, there are a few things that do make it at least passable, like the animation is fine, the story is well structured, and I like how it talks about that tough moment in our childhood where we have to start growing up. You'll have to ask someone who knows the franchise well how this is compared to the live action films or the books, or if this is even good to use as a gateway to the franchise like what I just did, but personally, I find it to be a harmless watch. There is obviously better stuff to watch on Disney Plus, but you don't have anything to lose if you have an hour to spare. It's nothing to really write about on your diary, but at least it'll leave you in a better position than the Wimpy Kid himself.
Want to see my